Welcome to Between the Reads, where Black books are shared and celebrated all year long. I'm your host, Audra Russell. There are so many great things going on this year as I continue to amplify Black stories, but I can't do it without your support. Please consider heading over to patreon.com/betweenthereads and becoming a member, or make a one-time donation at www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. Are you ready, boos and bros? Then sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Today, when Olivia's not saving the world by working for a nonprofit, she's pouring all of her energy and time into writing. Her love of anime, however, started when she was a child. She'd rush home from school to watch whatever came on Toonami, initially called Tsunami. It was at this time that her passion for writing and reading began. But she's a lover of novels, not manga so much. Her comic book phase ended before she got to middle school. It's only natural that her book series bursts with anime tropes and themes. Female protagonists' anime stories was a long time coming, and she's thrilled to finally share it with you all. Olivia, welcome to Between the Reads.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome.
Let's
get right into it. Tell our readers what Child of Water, the prequel, is all about.
Okay, so Child of Water, the prequel, is one of the several books that is and will continue to be in female protagonist anime stories. Child of Water, the prequel, is about a water goddess who comes from an African country. I won't say which one until you read the book. And she ends up through different means into southern Japan. And when she's there, she's adopted into a royal Japanese family. The daimyo takes her in, but due to certain circumstances, she ends up alone and wandering. She realizes that she has this power to control water. She can make it rain and things of that nature. At the same time, there is a very severe drought going on in southern Japan. So she's taken captive by a power-hungry warlord who plans to use her to grow his domain. And he gives her very limited freedom. During this time, it's about her finding herself, her deciding as a person is the whole greater than the individual, and what's her obligation to people to help them if she can, even if she's been taken captive by them.
And how do you say her name? Aoi. Okay. All right.
Yes,
Aoi. So, what was the inspiration for this novel?
Well, when it comes to power, I've always liked water. I've always liked water abilities, and whenever I would watch shows where there were supernatural beings or anime characters, I always liked characters who could control water. So that Storm is my favorite X-Men character, so there's also that. But what was also behind it is I love history. I love history from multiple countries. Japanese history is one of the countries that I really, really enjoy reading about and learning about. And I knew I wanted a book that had a Black woman lead, just because it's not super common to see Black women leads in historical fictions, especially if it's not taking place in Africa or if it's not a slave book. So I wanted it to be just like a regular, happy, contemporary book that is historical fiction that has a positive Black lead and so on and so forth.
So it's historical fiction, but it's also anime?
Well, yeah, it's anime inspired. So, yeah, people who are into anime and manga would definitely enjoy it and catch on to several of the descriptions and tropes and things like that. People who have read it have said, oh, it reminds me of anime. And I'm like, yeah, that's the whole point. So great. But there have also been a lot of people who aren't into anime, who don't necessarily care about anime, who are also looking for a good love story, because it's also a love story too. So it's a slow burn romance, and people who aren't into anime have also told me how they've enjoyed it.
And for our readers out there that don't know what anime is, what is anime?
Anime is a type of Japanese animation. It comes from Japan. It has to be from Japan, and there are several tropes about anime that if you're familiar with it, you'll see. Like, they have what we call sweat drops. They have like the huge snot bubbles when they're sleeping, a lot of different things. They have a lot of love harems, things of that nature. So, but anime is just Japanese animation. It's animation that comes out of Japan that is particular to Japanese culture, but it's blown up globally so that people all over the world have come to enjoy it.
So that snot bubble that I think was it Siniche? I don't think it was Siniche.
Kishomaru?
That was a nod to anime.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was like, sleeping and he's blowing a snot bubble. What is going on?
You're not the only one to point that out. When I had a beta reader, she said the same thing. She was like, okay, that's kind of weird. It's like, it reminds me, I'm like...
I mean, drool I would expect, but a snot bubble, I was like, okay, that's interesting. All right.
Yeah, that's kind of gross. Hopefully people in actual life aren't having snot bubbles when they sleep. That's kind of nasty.
That is kind of nasty.
Like, I hope.
Like, you have a whole sinus infection if you got snot bubbles blowing.
Yeah. Certainly hope I'm not sleeping next to someone who has a big snot bubble. Okay. Yeah.
So was your love of martial arts what inspired this novel?
Oh my goodness. I love martial arts. I grew up as a kid, like Kung Fu, martial arts, grew up loving Five Deadly Venoms, Five Fingers of Death, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, all of the above. I love karate-based anime and things of that nature too. And actually, Child of Water, the prequel, is the only non-martial arts based book that I have. The book before it and the books coming after it all have samurai in it as the main character. This one, I wanted it to be different because I knew I wanted to show I'm more versatile than just action. I could have a love story too. So,
Now, in the preface, you told the reader that people may question the viability of Africans living in feudal age Japan, which is late 1400s. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so historically, Japan went through different periods where there were times where they dealt with a lot of trade. So certain parts of Japan, they were definitely introduced to Dutch, Indians, people like that, some English people, but they weren't really introduced to Africans, Portuguese, people of that ethnic background. But there were some possible and some true interactions where some Japanese, in very limited circumstances, did encounter Africans because they often came as slaves alongside people who were coming from English backgrounds. So very, very limited. And even the Japanese people who were encountering foreigners, it wasn't super common. So I don't know if you've heard, but one of the, I guess, legendary Black samurai, and I guess the only one that we hear about, Yasuke, or I actually don't know how people choose to pronounce his name because it has changed spellings, but he came as a slave, and Oda Nobunaga fell in love with his very dark skin and was like, oh, have him stripped down and we'll wash it off. He thought he was, dirty. And it was like, it's like, oh, it doesn't wash off. And so he was so impressed and he purchased him. And he was, taught swordsmanship and kendo and all of that. And it was very interesting. So these interactions were possible, but very limited. And also, I will say, remember, it is fiction. Even though it's historical fiction, it is fiction. So liberties are allowed. for anyone who's like, that's not possible, it is fiction at the end of the day.
You can do anything you want in fiction.
Yes,
so that
absolutely.
is
it's fiction.
That African samurai is the picture that you talked about, that you found on the internet, of the black man in the 1800s.
No, actually, because he happened, Edo period, that was, right before the Edo period, that was like around the 1700s and all of that. So, but there is one that I found where he is, his hair's kinky and pulled up into a samurai knot, and he has on their kimono and all of that, and the Matsuki jacket. So there are photographs of some limited incidences of black people being in Japan well before the 21st century, but again, very limited, very scarce, but it's possible. That's all that I was trying to say. It's possible for those who, want to be historical fact checkers.
Okay. So you decided to reimagine Japan through the experiences of an African woman, Aoi, and correct me if I say it wrong, because I forget names real quick.
Yeah. Oh, and before I forget, Aoi is her Japanese name. Her actual name is something else. When she was, her name was changed. Yeah.
But I'm trying not to give that away. They have to read that for themselves. So her name is Aoi. If you want to know what her name actually is, you need to read the book, because it's very good.
Yes.
But let's talk about Aoi. Describe her for our readers.
It's interesting because how I perceive her isn't always how other people perceive her. So I always get beta readers. Those are people who, before you publish a book, they tell you what they think of it. So some people say, oh, she's too perfect. She's like a Mary Sue character. Others say, she's not all that smart because she has all this power, like blah, 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 blah. I won't get into that, but, and when I created her, I wanted to show a duality of personalities, of how people can grow and be shaped by their environment, and how past circumstances don't always have to have a negative result. Like some of our past traumas, in some people's case, can develop them into being very selfless, giving people who want to just purify the whole world. But in being that, sometimes, you have to juggle. Are you helping others to the detriment of yourself?
Absolutely.
So I thought about this when I was creating her and how I wanted to show all of that.
Yeah, because she's kidnapped from Africa. Taken to a Portuguese plantation and enslaved. And then from there she ends up in Japan, where that's really, that and the Portuguese plantation are the only memories that she has left. She doesn't remember anything about who she is in Africa. None of that.
Right.
And yet she went through this horrible period in slavery where she was whipped and she was beaten, just treated horribly. And yet through the whole story, like when she and Shinichi were caught in the trees, and the little demon like wanderer children were torturing them, and the one kid gets bit by a snake and she's like hanging upside down and they beat her in the head, and all she's worried about is this little boy and getting the snake venom out of his leg. Like she's just so benevolent, and it's just annoying.
Well, now, see, I'm curious. Why did you find that annoying?
Because I felt like she needed to whoop somebody's butt. I mean, even when she was enslaved for a year because she dared to help some people who really needed it. And then the man, and like I said, I'm horrible with remembering character names, but when the man freed her and put her up in the palace and everything like that, and he's like, well, you could be mad, but what you really should do is focus on the fact that I freed you, and now you can live in my palace and have access to everything you want. And she's like, well, that's right. No. Ma'am, we need to have some righteous indignation about you being in a hole for a year and only being brought out when they need a rain. That's why I find it annoying, because no matter what you did to her, she's just like, it's okay. It's good. It's not, I don't want anyone else to go through what I've gone through, and so if I can help people, she's like a Mother Teresa.
Yeah, and there was someone who was like, I hate it. They found it super irritating that she was like that. But there were other people who loved that she was like that. So I always enjoy hearing people's interpretation of Aoi, because I'm like, how I meant her to be doesn't matter. It's what you all perceive her as, and that's what I love.
I needed Aoi to step into her power, which she did later. But
yeah, she did.
I needed her to step into that power a lot sooner. Because, ma'am.
Well, too, in reading her, I want people to think about how they could be like this at times. I'm sure all of us have encountered people where we're kind of like, aren't you upset? Like, aren't you pissed off? And they're kind of like, well, when I look from the other side, perhaps I was wrong. Maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. Like, there are some people who will always excuse how they're mistreated because they want to be benevolent and put themselves in the shoes of the other person. And sometimes in being very forgiving or kind, we are taken advantage of. And I think it's all about that balance where some people try very hard to make others happy and to think about others, but they don't always think about themselves and how it's affecting themselves until Aoi finds her strength, and we see how that turned out. So
I was just like, by the end of the book, I just okay, I need to go read. I have so many books that authors I've had on the show, and they all have like sequels to their books that I need to go read, because it's like, what is going on? And by the end of this book, it was the same thing. What is going on? And I have the other books on my Kindle. I need to... You know what? I have surgery on Tuesday, and I will be in the bed for at least 4 or 5 days, and then resting for 6 weeks. I will be reading the rest of these books. Be prepared for me to be in your DMs if I don't like what I see.
That is fine. Look, that is fine. I love hearing the commentary. I promise that I love it, and I get such a kick out of it, right? Because it also shows that it's a good enough book to get a real emotion out of you, to have you react to it. So whether it's a positive or negative reaction,
I mean, the fact that you got
with
me,
you in some kind of way.
Me responding, that's always a good thing. Because if I don't care about a book, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. But this is like, no. Aoi, I need you to come on. Come on now. I need you to... The math ain't mathin', ma'am. Yeah. Come on now. I mean, she's so devoted to her faith. And, and I love when she gets questioned about it. Like, do you really think that this God that you love so much would allow you to go through all this? Like, where's your... She was basically asked, like, where is your God? And she's just like, oh, well, I believe I went through this, and, where she gives this whole explanation. I'm like... Do you ever get mad? I was so happy when she finally did get mad. And I'm not going to say what made her mad, because that reveals the whole other person that she is. But I was so happy to see her get upset. I needed that a lot. Okay, so now Aoi she's in this land of Sokan. Am I saying that right, Sokan? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk about, you alluded to a little bit, but let's talk about the history of Sokan and the priest and the empress and how they caused Sokan's ruin.
Okay, so with the land of Sokan, again, during this time in all of southern Japan, there was a drought. So land wasn't growing, nothing was prospering, people were hungry, poor. There was a lot of crime because people had to take from what others had because they didn't have anything, because farms wouldn't harvest and grow. So Sokan is just one of the Hans slash domains, whatever you would prefer to call it, in the south that is also going through this drought. And after Aoi comes to bring it rain and all of that, they're the only Han that is able to flourish and thrive. So their fruits grow, their trees grow, and as a result, everything about their land prospers in that they can now afford military weapons, they can afford this, they can afford that, they can afford trade from other countries because they have all of this product and produce to sell and to harvest. So other surrounding territories begin taking loans from them, and the head of Sokan charges them with very high interest rates because he's the only one who has anything, so he has full say-so. And he also wants to keep Aoi's presence a secret because if people know about his prize cow, what's to stop them from taking her from him and, growing their Hans? And then he's not as powerful without her there. So he has to keep her a secret, but yeah. Poor Aoi.
Poor thing. I mean, he just grabs her and, has her flourishing his land and just has her imprisoned. Poor thing.
He has her in prison, but you could also say he has good intentions of helping his people, that his people get to, I could look on your face, it's like, no. Well, let's think about it like a king, right? Like a king always wants to protect their people and keep their territory strong, right? I mean, this is a time where people went to war. Who's going to go to war with you if you have it all and they don't have anything? So politics are always involved.
I don't know how you're looking out for your people at the expense of one human being. I don't know, Olivia. I don't know.
Well, Aoi wasn't one of his people, so I guess he's like...
So he's an enslaver.
Hey.
I mean, that doesn't make it any better. He's an enslaver who uses this one poor African woman to flourish his land at the expense of her freedom. Sound familiar? I'm just saying. All right. So Aoi had superpowers. Let's talk about those and how and why did you give her these superpowers?
Okay, well, with my first book, Kuroichi, Birth of a Kunoichi, I had the idea of that main character being a reincarnation of one of the 7 gods of luck in Japanese Shintoism. And I thought, well, I want to continue that and have another character who is also that, who has powers because of that as well. And again, I chose water because I love water. Water is the well of life and all of that. So water is what we need to thrive And it's just so important that I thought a lot could be done with it, and that it's a good symbol of a lot of aspects of Aoi's personality also.
Okay.
So that's where that
All right.
comes from.
Now, throughout the book, Aoi denies her true identity, even though she's constantly told that she is something. She doesn't believe it. Why is she so afraid to acknowledge who she is?
May I ask first what you might think the reason is, and then I'll tell you?
Y'all, she questioning me on my own show.
Am I taking too many liberties here?
Fine. That's fine. That's what I can't figure out. I think that's why I'm asking the question, because it's like she has this aversion to power because she sees it used in the wrong way so much around her that she feels like she doesn't want to acknowledge it because she sees how power corrupts people.
Yeah. Well, so there are several aspects to that, right? I think in real life, a lot of people go through that where some people like to hide their talents, their skills, because they don't want to deal with the expectations of, now you know how great I am, I got to live up to it. Some people like to hide their identity because it's not safe to show who they really are. A person could be, for example, a Muslim, but not want to wear a hijab because maybe they feel they'll be discriminated against, or it'll be harder for them to get work, or just to be safe going out shopping. So when it comes to Aoi, she has this power, and as you said, it hasn't always been used in the best ways. It hasn't always garnered her the best of treatment. So on one hand, it's she's been taken from one place to another more than once. At some point as a human, when we're not voluntarily moving around and we're being taken by force, we just want to have a home. Everyone from when we were kids, we want to have a home and to have a family. And you don't want to do anything that could make you or make the people around you feel like you're very different. If you already look different, you don't want to take actions that further show you as an other, an outsider, someone who's not a part of the whole.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's where her mentality is coming in. She just wants to be accepted and loved, like
she just
anyone.
wants to be normal. Okay, yeah, I can see that because her, I guess she sees her powers as the reason why she's constantly uprooted. Okay. All right. I can accept that. I can accept that.
Not just why she's been uprooted, but I guess it goes back to when I was saying how past traumas can have positive effects where people take the Aoi route and they want to help others to prevent them from having to suffer how they suffered. But there's also the trauma in she was kept in prison for some time because of her powers. She was only given value because of her powers. If it wasn't for her powers, she probably would have died a penniless wanderer. But at the same time, her power has cast her with so much misfortune and a lot of responsibility to other people. So, double-edged sword, that just puts a lot on her.
A lot of pressure. Yeah, because you could see that she really. That was the other thing. Like I would have been like, I can control water. I'm a badass. That would have been me. But she's just like people were bowing to her because they knew that she was responsible for Sokan flourishing again, and she was just so uncomfortable with it. She's like, please don't bow to me. Please, I'm just a normal person. I'm not a goddess. all these things you're calling me. I'm just a normal person. And I'm just like, that's when I was like, Aoi, there's nothing normal about you. You control water. Like, let's just accept it. And step into the power, man. Step into the power. You know, and she was even questioned, like, why are you not like practicing your power and honing it and making it more powerful? You know, when she got caught in that rainstorm in the forest. And it really literally never dawned on her that she could take this gift and strengthen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, again, I think there are some people who are like that in actual life, who they have a gift, whatever that gift is, and they are intimidated by it, and they're not comfortable perfecting it. Some people are afraid of success. Right. And although that's kind of different from Aoi, because I don't know what would be success in that kind of world, but there are people in our world who are genuinely afraid of succeeding. And so they don't grow their talent.
Very true. So there's some nuggets of wisdom throughout the book here, some valuable life lessons.
That's what I hope.
So let's talk about, and I know I'm going to mess this up, the Tsuchigumo. Is that how you say it?
Oh, yes. The spider demons. Yes. Tsuchigumo. And yes, that is correct how you pronounced it. You can call them spider demons if that's easier. That's what they are.
I need to know. Did you create these yourself, or is this based on lore?
So yeah, those are based on lore. In Japanese mythology, there were a lot of types of demons, and spider demons being one of them. And I just thought, they look cool, they're interesting. I always Google different type of Japanese demons and try to see which ones I would like to incorporate into a story. Okay. So that was just one of them.
Big ass spiders came in the story twice and just destroyed everything.
Yeah.
Killing people.
As demons often do. Yeah.
Like, the first time it happened, I was like, oh. That's interesting. You know, it just caught me by surprise. I was not expecting the spider demon. They're just walking through the village.
What kind of demon?
I don't know. But not a spider.
Okay. Okay.
I don't like spiders.
I don't like spiders either, so they're perfect demons. Like, I don't like these. I would be terrified if I saw a giant spider demon.
Yeah, that's like last night when they were installing one of the doors, and the spider just kind of dropped out of the ceiling. And I'm telling my son to go get it, and he's like trying to like gingerly let it land on a piece of toilet paper so he could take it outside. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I don't want to kill it. I was like, kill it. It's in my house. It's dead. I'm sorry. It's gotta go.
Yeah. Yeah, I am the same way. Trust me.
And I especially was like that because I read your book. I was like, no spider demons in the house today, sir. You guys gotta go. We gotta kill it. So I want to switch to the writing side for a bit. You stated in the author's note that this story is not about racism. Okay, and because throughout the story, Aoi is looked at with awe because her skin is so dark. But you say that even though the story is not about racism, that stories that have black characters are always racialized. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that is my perception. Perhaps some other black authors would disagree, but just from my experience, whether it's in film or a book, whenever you put a character who is not white, especially a black character, as the front, any experience that they go through, especially if it is negative, it's always broken down into it's because they're black, it's because of their race. But again, in this book, I knew with making Aoi black, I would have to address it because people would be expecting it. And I wanted to, although I don't want to overly influence people's interpretations and how they would like to apply Aoi's journey, I also wanted to be clear that it was never my intention for this to be a comparison to or an analogy to racism. Especially because during this time in Japan, racism didn't really exist. It wasn't a thing. They encountered people from other countries, and there was no record of there being racism. There was no record of them thinking, oh, these people, we are greater than them because of their color or because of their features. If anything, it was more nationalism and patriotism, where it's like, we're Japanese, so we're the best people ever. You know, as the same as people from other countries are like, oh, we're Chinese, we're from this or that country, so we're the best people ever. It was more about nationalism at that time than anything else. So I just, you know, again, with, even though it's historical fiction, some parts of it I did want to keep accurate. So just because there's no record of racism being in any of their philosophy, ideology, I didn't want that to be something that would influence the book.
So you also mentioned that you had fears about making sure that you being careful about how you presented Aoi to the readers. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Right. So again, Aoi is Black. She is a Black woman. My books are for the American audience, right? So I do have to be realistic about how Black women, especially dark-skinned Black women, have been portrayed and sexualized and overly sexualized and degraded. So all of these things were in mind, from what would be a comfortable hairstyle for her to have, to how wide do I make her nose, how thick do I make her lips, what kind of figure do I give her. I didn't want it to be stereotypical in a negative way, but I also didn't want to have a Black character who's coming from the Himba tribe. Well, maybe I shouldn't have said what tribe that she comes from.
Right.
Okay, whatever.
That's
Okay. I didn't want to have a Black African character who was very light-skinned. I just think that's kind of... And when it comes to creativity, I don't ever want it to seem like I'm telling other authors what to do. Just for myself in creating Black characters, I did want to have a positive image of a very dark-skinned Black woman with kinky natural hair who had a wide nose or a bigger nose and thicker lips, without it being based on her sexuality or anything of that nature. I wanted it to just be, this is a regular human person, who is like, you know, just anyone you could come across without it having to be something prejudice or, you know, just a terrible portrayal. Because often when I've read books where, if I've read urban fiction, usually dark-skinned characters are portrayed very negatively, very, for lack of a better word, ghetto, hood rat. It was only recently in Hollywood that dark-skinned actresses got a starring role. Before, when I was a kid, I mean, I'm 29, so growing up, it was always the light-skinned Black woman who had all of the great roles. And even when they had great roles, they were always a minor character or a secondary character. So in the world of Hollywood and in America, whether it's in literature or on screen, there's a very short and limited history of a positive image of dark-skinned Black women being portrayed. So I felt, you know, I wanted to take on that kind of, not take it on, but I wanted to engage in that responsibility.
Okay.
So
I want to get just a teeny bit political.
Sure.
I listen to your voice, you're like, okay. You know, Roe v. Wade was just overturned. You discussed the treatment of women extensively in your author's notes. Share about some of the points you made and what impact you feel the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade will have.
Well, in the author's note, I do talk about how women in general, so white women included, and women of color, many times when it comes to a job of authority or a higher paying job, we face a lot of sexism that a lot of people don't acknowledge. And when I say people, I mean that as Black people, we can acknowledge racism, right? But Black men don't always acknowledge the sexism that women endure. So while we can be on the same side when it comes to targeting racism, I've encountered a lot of men of color in the Black community, Latino community, white community, Asian community, who don't want to acknowledge that while you're dealing with racism, we're also dealing with racism and sexism. And sexism at the hands of people who look like us.
Right.
People who we're the same race of. So I wanted to provide statistics to back up my points because, you know, people can argue opinions back and forth, but when I can show, no, according to these studies, according to these statistics, this is what's really happening and how men are doing this to women in the career world. And, you know, the same things, the same tools, the microaggression, the, you know, psychological warfare, the discrimination, the talking down to, the trying to oust you from certain positions that happens in the world of racism also happens in the world of sexism. And sometimes, let's take myself out of it. Let's say I'm a Latina and there is a Latino and a white man. They can both be victimizing me with patriarchy and racism. And for me, an important point is for all of us to understand that we can be a victim and a victimizer at the same time. We as straight people, though we are Black, can victimize non-straight Black people. I, as a Black woman, can be victimized by a Black man because of, again, patriarchy. So I just want people to understand you can be a victim and a victimizer depending, because however we agree or disagree, the reality is that there are several pockets in America, this huge hierarchy that's so much more than race. It's race plus your gender, race plus your sex, race plus your able-bodiedness. So all these things I want people to pay attention to, but also I want people to acknowledge that we have a lot of commonality. Like, I see some women who are like, well, as a Black woman, I have it so hard. But don't let that close you off from a white woman who also is being victimized by sexism too, and who can relate to some of the things that you're going through. At least that's how I personally take it, you know. So when it comes to what's going on with Roe versus Wade, I think a lot of people want to break that down into women's rights, right? Like, a lot of people make it women's rights, and you'll see people say, well, men shouldn't have any commentary on it. There are women who are pro-life. So I think when we have discussions about Roe versus Wade, we have to first have a foundation of what are we really talking about. If people say, oh, there are old there are old white guys who are making decisions on women's bodies. They're old and outdated. There are young people who feel the same way. So to me, that's not a great argument if you want to say, oh, well, it's just about women's rights. There are men who want to be fathers who, perhaps because of an abortion, they aren't able to become dads and they wanted that child. But at the same time, do we want men to be able to say, hey, I want you to get that abortion, and so you have to because I don't want to be a dad? So, but because there are men who do want to be parents and it is 50% their child, there have been men who have tried to stop an abortion from happening, right? So saying it's just about women, perhaps for some people isn't a fair argument either. Then you have some who will break it down to, well, is it a human life? So I think that is the best place to start, because then that's less about opinion and more about science. And science is usually something most people, regardless of their faith, regardless of their race, gender, can agree on, right? Like science is pretty global. So I think it's a much bigger issue than that. I think it's a much bigger issue than just women. I think it's a human issue, a person issue, a community issue, a sexual health issue, a bodily issue, and a lot of things that we as humans have to factor in. And it's very interesting. It's interesting in that I hope for the states that are deciding to ban abortions that they are putting a lot of funding behind organizations that cater to single parents, organizations that cater to teenage parents, organizations that cater to helping moms and dads get education and work. Because otherwise, it seems pretty hypocritical to say, we value human life so much you can't abort, but we're not going to help you take care of the child after it's been brought into the world. So I'm just hoping that those states are doing they're doing their decisions justice by going beyond that to actually catering to and shedding light on organizations that help single and young parents.
Well said. So why did you feel it was important to include this author's note at the end of the book?
A lot of different reasons. Okay, well, one, the author's note part came shortly after International Women's Day during Women's Month, and there was a argument that had occurred on International Women's Day that really got me pretty upset. And so being a writer, we express ourselves in books. So one, I wanted to kind of take out that frustration with the misinformation and the intentional blatant ignorance by addressing it. I don't know how many men are going to read Child of Water, the prequel, but even for women who pick it up, when they engage in some ignorant, sexist, dumb conversations, I'm like, this information is out here and it's beneficial to have, because sometimes when we are trying to educate people on what we're going through, we don't always have the facts at our disposal. We just have our experience. But for some people, our experience isn't good enough. So that was one of the things. The other thing is I did want to, my book series, all of the books focus on having a woman lead. So for me, it's just important because as a kid who grew up loving anime, at that time, and even still a lot today, there weren't really a lot of like positive depictions of women, period, or of girls. They were what people in the anime service call as a fan service. They were, just there for being dumb, a girlfriend, a asexual thing, but they didn't have a lot of autonomy outside of being just this sexual character, a bimbo, or just there. And, I'm like, I'm into the action. I'm into the karate and the martial arts and to the swords and the, guns and stuff. So I wanted a book series that showed action-based women. So again, Child of Water is a love story, but it also shows women have strengths in different ways. Aoi's type of strength and her personality, some people may not see it as a strength, but that's her strength. But people have different type of things that make them strong. And I didn't want to have just one depiction of what a strong woman is. I think people like to say I'm a strong woman, but what's a strong woman to you might look different from what a strong woman is to me. So, but with the author's note, the main thing was just addressing some of the ignorance that's out there, some of the intentional blindness that is out there when it comes to men of color who don't want to acknowledge the sexism that women go through because they're too focused on their pain and they want to focus on just theirs and not ours. And they don't understand that unity and caring about all of us means including our struggles too, not just their struggles as men of color, but also ours as women of color. And movements, a lot of the political movements that have been the most helpful and uplifting to Black people, whether it wants to be acknowledged or not, if we're going to go based on history, have been founded, started, and headed by Black women.
Absolutely.
And that's just the truth. I mean, if you want to fight me on it, then pull up facts to prove me wrong. But most of them have been started by Black women. And Black women historically and even now have always catered to protecting, helping, and shielding Black men. And a lot of Black women have acknowledged in recent times that the favor hasn't been returned to the same degree of protection. So that now you have some Black women who have decided they hate Black men and won't ever date or marry a Black man. You have some Black women who, as a result, they talk down to a lot of Black men. There's this war and tension and head-butting between Black men and Black women in some communities. I think it's ridiculous because I can acknowledge that you go through certain things as a Black man that are terrible. I just want you to acknowledge the same for me. I also want people to have enough discernment to understand that, I'm not attacking Black men. I'm not attacking Black women. I'm not trivializing anyone's struggle. I want people to acknowledge that we can be under the same umbrella, but still have struggles unique to our other factors of identity.
Absolutely. So, how many other books are there in the female protagonists anime series?
Currently, there are 3. I'm putting out a 4th book next month, July. Yeah, so that's exciting. So the first book, Kuroichi, the main character is a Japanese teenage girl, and that is a standalone book. I might have a final sequel around 2024, 2025, possibly. But Kuroichi is a standalone book. Now with Child of Water, I enjoy, if you get to the end of Child of Water, you understand where there will be a sequel, and the sequel to that turns into a series. So there's Child of Water, The Rousing, that is out. And then there will be Child of Water, The Unsettled, and then Child of Water, The Merging. So the merging I'm working on, but yeah, so it turns into a long kind of journey, but I think it's a necessary one for the sake of comparison, juxtaposition, and just keeping a good story going.
Okay. So tell us a little more about what we can expect to see in the other books, just like briefly.
A lot more action. So, I mean, now I love love. I love romance. So there will always be romance in it too. But Child of Water, the prequel, is far less action and far more romance and coming of age. Child of Water, the Rousing, and the books that come after that, definitely more war-based, samurai-based. So if you're into swords and things like that, you'll enjoy those more. They're more action adventure books. The element of fantasy and power are still there. And of course, it's always about showing a character's journey, how, you know, it's important for me as a writer to not just put a character in a predicament, but to also show how that predicament changes their personality and their ideology and how it shapes them, how they go from being over here to being over here. You know, and how it's not an overnight process. It's a build-up from different encounters. So get to see a lot of character development.
Okay. And where can readers find your books?
My books are on Amazon, great old Amazon. So, yeah, initially I had my books on Kobo, Scribd, and all these other sites. And then I said, well, you know, I want to concentrate on one site. It's easier to market that way when it's just on one site. And I chose Amazon because it is the biggest online retailer. Most people who get books do get them from Amazon. So
Amazon.
And yeah, and it's done very well for me. So I'm no complaints.
Okay, and where can we find you on social media?
I'm on Instagram. I have a YouTube page, but I need to put out a lot more content. So mostly just find me on Instagram at FPAS by Olivia. That's FPAS by Olivia. FPAS being for Female Protagonist Anime Stories. That is the book series title, all the other books under it. So FPAS by Olivia. And you could email me at that email address for Gmail if you have any questions, or if people have very strong reactions and like, hey, I hate that you wrote this in the book, or, you know, what's going to happen next, feel free to send an email and I will respond.
All right. Do you have a website or not yet?
I don't have a website yet. You know, my thing is I will have one by the end of this year. I just want to, because it is, again, anime inspired, I want to have a lot more illustrations for the visual people, a lot more animated videos. I'm working on getting some now. They take time to get produced. You know, you got to get the voice acting and all that. So it takes time, but I want to have, like, I don't want to have a website where you click on it and everything is coming soon, coming soon. You know, I've clicked on sites and everything is coming soon, and then you forget to come back to it. So I don't want to put it up until it's totally done.
Okay.
I have all of the content that I want to have
Fair enough. Well, we have come to the end of our show. I want to thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad. I truly enjoyed this. And, you know, this is kind of my foray into anime-inspired novels. So I'm glad I got a chance to. I'm looking forward to reading the other books in the series.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. And y'all know what time it is. At the end of every show, I leave you with a quote. And today's quote comes from the late, great Shirley Chisholm, first black woman elected to the United States Congress. And she said, "No matter what men think, abortion is a fact of life. Women have always had them. They always have, and they always will. Are they going to have good ones or bad ones? Will the good ones be reserved for the rich, while the poor women go to quacks. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Grab a book and read, and I'm out. You've been listening to Between the Reads. I'm your host, Audra Russell. Thanks for lending me your ear. If you enjoy this content, please consider supporting this independent podcast by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/betweenthereads or making a one-time donation at www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. That's www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. Tune in next week for another great episode.